In 2025, the world watched with disbelief as a name unfamiliar to many in the West echoed through the grand halls of Oslo: Ibrahim Traoré. The announcement struck like lightning. Burkina Faso's young revolutionary leader had just been awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. For his people, it was a triumph, a long-awaited recognition of Africa's dignity. But in the corridors of power in Washington, Paris, and London, the news sparked whispers, suspicion, even outrage. How could a man who defied Western dominance, expelled foreign armies, and championed African sovereignty be crowned with the world's most prestigious honor? This was more than a prize. It was a statement. And it left the West in shock. To understand why Traoré's Nobel Prize win was so explosive, one must return to the dusty roads of Ouagadougou, where his journey began. Ibrahim Traoré, a military captain barely in his 30s, rose to prominence not by chasing power, but by responding to desperation. Burkina Faso, plagued by terrorism, corruption, and decades of neo-colonial manipulation, had lost hope. Foreign interventions promised security but delivered chaos. Western corporations drained the land of gold and resources, while the people lived in poverty. When Traoré seized power in 2022, critics branded him a coup leader. Yet, to the youth of Africa, he became a symbol of courage. He wore no designer suits, spoke in simple words, and declared that Burkina Faso would no longer bow to colonial masters. He ended unfair contracts, demanded justice for Africa's stolen wealth, and forged new alliances with nations outside Western influence. The West responded with sanctions, propaganda, and threats. News outlets painted him as a dangerous populist, but his popularity only grew, stretching far beyond Burkina Faso. Across Africa, students held up his picture, chanting his name. To them, he was a David standing against a global Goliath. By 2025, the Nobel Committee faced a dilemma. Could they recognize a man who had broken the mold of Western-approved leadership? Or would they, as they so often had, look away from Africa's cries for justice? Their choice would ignite debates around the world and test the very credibility of the Nobel Prize itself. When the announcement came, it wasn't just the prize that shocked the world, but the reasoning behind it. The Nobel Committee cited Traoré's unwavering pursuit of African self-determination, resistance against exploitation, and his courage in promoting a new global balance. It was language that directly contradicted the narratives pushed by Western powers. For decades, Africa had been portrayed as a continent needing saving by aid, by military intervention, by foreign investors. Traoré shattered that image. He insisted that Africa could save itself if allowed sovereignty over its resources and future. His policies cut ties with old colonial contracts, demanded gold revenues stay within Africa, and pushed for regional unity. But here lay the racial injustice that had long simmered. Whenever African leaders resisted exploitation, they were branded dangerous. When Western leaders fought wars or pursued self-interest, they were hailed as defenders of democracy. The double standard was glaring. Traoré's Nobel Prize forced the world to confront this hypocrisy. Reactions poured in immediately. In Paris, commentators sneered, calling it a political mistake. Washington think tanks warned that the Nobel Committee had legitimized anti-Western rhetoric. Yet in African capitals, celebrations erupted. Young men and women danced in the streets. For them, this was more than an award. It was validation. For the first time, a leader who stood against exploitation was recognized rather than punished. Still, tension mounted. Western governments feared Traoré's recognition would inspire others across Africa to reject old arrangements. And indeed it did. From Mali to Niger, from Congo to South Africa, politicians and activists declared that the Nobel had exposed the truth, that Africa's fight for dignity was not extremism, but justice. In newsrooms, debates raged. Was the Nobel Prize supposed to be neutral, or had it become a weapon in the battle for global influence? Could a young African captain truly reshape history? Or was he just another temporary symbol? These questions swirled, heightening the drama of Traoré's unexpected rise. The climax came during Traoré's Nobel acceptance speech in Oslo. Standing before the world, dressed not in tailored luxury but in his simple military uniform, he spoke with calm intensity. His words carried both pain and defiance. He reminded the audience of Africa's centuries of humiliation, slavery, colonization, stolen resources, and imposed poverty. He spoke of villages burned by terrorists, while the West extracted gold just miles away. He named no enemies, yet everyone knew who he meant. "We do not beg for dignity," he declared. "We claim it." For too long, the world has treated Africa as a mine, a battlefield, a charity case. But Africa is humanity's birthplace, the heart of tomorrow. The Nobel Prize today is not mine alone. It belongs to the mothers who lost sons, to hunger, to the children digging in mines they will never profit from, to every African who still dares to dream. The hall fell silent. Some Western delegates shifted uncomfortably, others clapped half-heartedly, but for millions watching across Africa, his words struck like thunder. The climax wasn't just his speech, it was the reaction. Social media exploded. Hashtags like Nanak Africa Rises and Traore Nobel trended worldwide. Yet Western outlets quickly scrambled, dissecting his every sentence, warning of anti-Western populism. The divide was now undeniable. What Africans saw as liberation, many in the West saw as a threat. The Nobel Prize had not ended the battle, it had intensified it. In the weeks after the ceremony, the impact of Traoré's Nobel Prize rippled across the globe. Universities invited him to speak, African unions rallied around his message, and young leaders from Ghana to Kenya declared that a new chapter of history had begun. For once, the global stage acknowledged an African leader not for compliance, but for resistance, yet the prize also exposed deep fractures. Western think tanks called it a mistake that would destabilize geopolitics. Analysts warned of economic consequences if African nations followed Traoré's path. Sanctions loomed, threats lingered. But something irreversible had happened. Africa had seen one of its own crowned, not condemned. Racial injustice, long buried under diplomatic language, was now glaringly visible. Why was it so shocking for an African leader who stood against exploitation to be celebrated? Why did dignity for Africa feel like danger to the West? These were questions the Nobel Prize forced the world to confront. For Traoré himself, the award was less about personal glory and more about responsibility. In interviews, he insisted, "The Nobel Prize is not the end. It is a reminder that the struggle continues." Indeed, the struggle would continue. But one thing was clear. History had shifted. A young captain from Burkina Faso had forced the world to listen. And no matter how the West reacted, the image of Ibrahim Traoré holding that golden medal would live on as a symbol of Africa's rising voice. The Nobel Prize of 2025 had done more than honor a man. It had cracked open the illusions of global fairness, exposing the raw, unspoken truth. And whether one saw it as triumph or threat, the message was clear. Africa was no longer whispering. It was speaking, and the world had no choice but to hear.